let's treat ourselves and our bodies with respect and love. What is compassionate? What's loving? And it's not eating, a bunch of chips and ice cream, So there's a difference between eating to feel good in the moment and eating to feel good about yourself long term.
Hey, it's Dr. B. Welcome back to another episode of the Thrive State podcast. I am super stoked for today's episode because this is the topic I've wanted to touch on for quite some time, which is emotional eating. So many of us know that, when it comes to diet, when it comes to food, when it comes to how we eat, it's actually not just the food itself, or it's not the diet itself, which is why sometimes when you're trying to lose weight, just focusing on a diet or the food oftentimes fails. In fact, sometimes fails up to 98% because what drives a lot of our behavior is how we feel. And a lot of times, because food is something that's so abundant and not necessarily illegal, it's one of those things that people use to kind of pick up and cope with their stress or what's going on inside. So on today's episode, you're really going to start to understand what emotional eating is. And if you've had problems before with your weight, with dieting, this might be an episode to really dig into, because we're going to understand the anatomy of an emotional eater, what are some triggers, and what you can do right now to stop emotional eating. So I'm really, really happy to introduce you to our next guest, which is Tricia Nelson. She's lost over 50 pounds by identifying and healing the underlying causes of her emotional eating. She has spent over 30 years researching the hidden causes of an addictive personality. Tricia is an emotional eating expert and the author of the #1 bestselling book, Heal Your Hunger: 7 Steps to End Emotional Eating Now. She also certifies health coaches so that they can get better results, referrals, and revenue by helping their clients overcome emotional eating. Tricia is the host of a popular podcast, The Heal Your Hunger Show. She is a well-respected speaker and has been featured on numerous media outlets, including NBC, CBS, KTLA, Fox, and Discovery Health. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tricia Nelson. Tricia Nelson, welcome to the Thrive State podcast.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Well, fantastic. I am so glad you're here because emotional eating is something I wanted to do a deep dive on. Many people don't recognize, and I talk about it in my book, emotion drives so much of our behavior and so much of our unwanted behavior. And certainly if weight and health is something you desire, focusing down, understanding why you're eating and what are some of the things that we can do to control some of those cravings is something I definitely want to get into. Now, before I get into that, though, we start off with the show with something called the 5 to Thrive. 5 quick questions just to let our audience get to know you a little bit better. They're each worth 1,000 points, but the points mean nothing. And again, we want to keep this answer shorter than a minute long. So let me know when you're ready, Tricia Nelson.
Good. Yeah, I'm ready to rock and roll.
Question number 1. What was your favorite childhood activity?
I like to play kickball with my neighbors across the street and like into the evening, dusk, super fun. Just, let it all hang out. Super fun.
Oh, super cool. Yeah, I forgot that sport. That was one of my favorites as well. Question number 2, the most challenging time you've had in your life.
Boy, that's a tough one. I'd say, certainly being obese was not an easy, thing to go through. So that's probably the number 1, but I'll give you number 2. And that was my dad dying of cancer.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
Question number 3. What is your favorite self-care activity?
I would say meditation. I meditate twice a day for 20 minutes and it's rocked my world. It's changed my entire life.
Fantastic. Question number 4. What are you most proud of?
I'm most proud of, I would say, my mission to help emotional eaters in my business, which I started 4.5 years ago, called Heal Your Hunger. I'd say that's, that and moving beyond my marriage 2.5 years ago.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's something maybe we can kind of like chime into, because I'm pretty
Sure.
sure stress and some type of emotion sometimes trigger some emotional eating as well. Last question for you, a little bit related, but I'm very curious as to what this answer might be for you. But how would you like to be remembered, Tricia Nelson?
I would like to be remembered as just somebody with a lot of light.
Oh, great. And it's definitely shining through today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Before we start to get into the emotional eating, I kind of want to, tap into the hero's journey by knowing a little bit about how you started to get into this field. So how did you grow up? What was childhood like? And how did you become, quote unquote, obese? And were you actually obese by the BMI scale? So let's go back a little bit to your childhood, in terms of
Sure.
what your childhood was like, and was emotional eating part of your life, your entire life, or do you think it picked up at any point?
Oh yeah, as far back as I can remember, I think I was an emotional eater. So I loved food. I was totally obsessed with food as far back as I can remember. I loved to cook. I loved to eat. I loved to serve food to other people. I loved to go out to dinner. I'd have heart palpitations when my family was going out to dinner. And I love to have steak and baked potato with, lots of butter and sour cream. And my mom would give me the evil eye, like watch it on the butter. And so, cause she, I think, had a sense I was out of control, and I was gaining weight, in my adolescence.
Mhm.
So, but literally I would say back, when I was 4 or 5, I was overeating. And when I got into on my recovery journey, many years ago, several decades ago, I looked back and I realized that I had a habit, a pretty frequent routine of getting sick to my stomach on Sunday nights.
Mhm.
So I would, in the middle of the night, I would have an upset stomach, and I would get up and I would wake my mother up, and she was a good mom. She would comfort me and kind of rub my back as I was puking. And then she'd give me ginger ale. And when I looked back, I thought, well, isn't that strange that I had this weak stomach and I would get sick to my stomach regularly, and it happened to be on Sunday nights, and when I dug into that, I realized that was mostly from my family tension, like the experience. That's when I did the bulk. I
Yeah.
mean, probably, I think I overate all week long, but especially I did a lot of binging on the weekend, pizza and donuts and, things that I was able to get my hands on. And so, what I gleaned from that is that I was emotionally eating in response to stress from my family
Mhm.
life, and it wasn't so terrible. I mean, my parents were good parents, but we all were in pain. We all, were anesthetizing our pain with certain addictions. And my sisters were also overeaters. So there was a lot of just, unaddressed feelings, and I buried it with food for sure. And so that was the result of it. So that was
Mhm.
kind of
Yeah.
a horrifying memory that I had. But anyway, bottom line is, I had stuff and I didn't know how to deal with it. And I had sexual abuse as a kid as well from a relative. And my sisters had sexual abuse from a family friend. So we were all hurting units. We were all in pain with no real constructive tools to deal with that pain. And as a result, we were using different things. So I did have a lot of pain, and I covered it up. And I also had a very, cheerful, outgoing personality. So I was kind of a go-getter, and I did well, relatively well in school. And I was president of my school in high school, and I varsity sports and all this kind of thing. So I covered a lot of that pain up,
Yeah.
but it was hard to hide the weight. So by age 20, I was 50 pounds overweight. And so that's hence the obesity,
Oh, I see.
nomenclature. So I was obese, and basically hated every minute of it. Like I hated being fat. and I had a roll in my tummy that I would scrunch up in my hands and imagine cutting it off. Like, like you can cut fat off the side of a steak. So I thought, well, it's just fat. Maybe I could cut it off. And, I thought maybe I'd get some disease, or I automatically lost weight, or I even thought I'll join the army and they'll force me to exercise at boot camp. So I had some pretty outlandish thoughts about my weight because I had tried dieting, several times, and I could lose weight, but I always put it back on. I was something like you'd call
Yo-yo,
it,
right?
yes, a yo-yoer. And so that
Well, let
was
me
kind
ask
of how it went.
you mentioned at the age of 4 or 5, you started to use food in that way. Did you say at that time you were modeling other people, or do you think food was just so available to you that it became probably the default to be dealing with stress? And please tell people at the age of 4 or 5, you can still experience stress in your life.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it was a combination it was really threefold. So I think, I know I have the genetic disposition because both my parents were overweight in their childhood. So they have, the genes.
Yeah.
So I have the genes to gain weight easily, slow metabolism. And because they were overweight as younger people, they probably had their issues too with food.
Sure.
And then, you don't, as a kid, you don't have a lot of coping tools,
Yeah.
appropriate coping tools. And especially, this was, I'm not a spring chicken, so this is a little ways back. So, going to therapy was not a normal thing necessarily. And so, and my parents they didn't know anything about that. So we all just did what we could. And food is a really useful and accessible way of stuffing your feelings. There's just not a lot of options. I used other things, fantasy, television, masturbation, I was using different things to just trip out. But food is, it's handy. It's handy and it works, frankly. Carbs and sugar, they
Oh.
were my friends, and they honestly probably saved my life at one time.
Sure, sure. Just having an avenue to get yourself out of some of the stress is so important, which is why, people talk about, addictions and how to deal with certain type of drug addicts, and locking them in jail isn't necessarily the answer because, are you familiar with Gabor Mate's work?
I
Like,
am not. Well, I
so
might
Gabor
be,
Mate is
but
a
I don't know his name.
physician who talks a lot about trauma, talks about childhood trauma. And a lot of people, and he says basically addictions are basically the natural path for any human to go through if they're trying to find a way out of their pain.
Absolutely.
And
And
to
now that you
punish
mention
them
him,
for
I do
having their
remember him.
pain
Yeah.
is actually quite something that is, very archaic and not really addressing that root cause of somebody actually having pain, right?
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
so you're in your 20s, you are now obese, you've tried different, diets. When did things start to click for you? Or like, was there additional pain for a couple of years and decades before, before you started to figure some of this stuff out?
I was so lucky and blessed, really, because at a very, I tried lots of things. So by 21, I was pretty desperate, and I was putting two and two together, which is, and because if you look at the list, I did diets, I did exercise programs, I did pills and potions and lotions and, books, self-help books. I went to therapy. I even had an eating disorders therapist. I went to 12-step programs. So I covered a lot of ground in a short period of time. I was on a quest because I was
Yeah.
so unhappy about my weight. So at a young age, I did, put two and two together and realized, the dieting thing is not going to work for me. Focusing on the symptom of food and weight is not working for me. And if I don't do something drastically different, this is going to be my life. Like yo-yoing up and down. I had like 5 different sizes of pants in my closet, because I never
Mhm.
knew what size I was going to be on that yo-yo swing. And so I just was very blessed to meet somebody who was more of a healer, spiritual healer type, who had been obese and lost the weight really through addressing the emotional eating and the emotions.
Yeah.
And that was that new tack for me, which really just changed my life, is to be able to stop, focusing on the symptom of food and weight, because it really is a symptom. Overweight is a symptom of overeating, and overeating is a symptom of what's eating me. And
Oh, wow.
so,
That's so beautiful. Yeah.
yeah. So once I started, really paying attention to that, everything turned around for me. So I'm very grateful. And that's really what my work is based on, is what
Mhm.
I did to heal. And then I worked with my mentor to help other people, for decades. And that's really, from that work is really where my work in Heal Your Hunger was born.
Oh, beautiful. So I want to just, really kind of give people a good definition of what emotional eating really is. So can you help us differentiate between the different types of hunger? What is emotional hunger? What actually is physical hunger? And how does somebody, figure that out for themselves?
Yeah. So, my experience is emotional hunger can very closely mimic physical hunger, in the symptoms. I can even get a growl in my stomach sometimes, but that's
Yeah.
not truly physical.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And so, but the fact is that emotional hunger is really needing food for reasons beyond nutritional need, and emotional eating is eating to cover up emotions.
Hmm.
So, and I'll have people say to me, "Oh, I don't do that." And they've been struggling chronically with food and weight for a while, but they're like, "Oh, I don't think I'm an emotional eater." And sometimes I'll say, well, it's probably working really well to the point where you're not aware of having emotions that you're eating over, And so snacking on a regular basis, like kind of perpetually eating and snacking, will keep you at a certain numbed out level to where you're not aware of emotions. And I so appreciate you're having me on your show, because it's hard to unhear this information. And what happened for me is, I thought I just like food. Like, it never occurred to me that,
Yeah.
I mean, this is a while ago when emotional eating wasn't a well-known term.
Yeah.
But I didn't even think of being an emotional eater. And so when my sister came home one day and said, "I'm an emotional eater," I didn't really like her. So anything she said, I pretty much discounted, and belittled. But she said that. And I thought, well, I just like food, like that's the craziest thing I've ever heard. But I couldn't unhear it. And after that, I started observing my relationship with food and realizing it's not the same as my friends. Like, I'd go out to lunch with friends and they'd order a sandwich and it would come with fries, and they would eat their sandwich and pick up their fries. Whereas I would eat my fries and pick up my sandwich, and I'd sit
Mhm.
there and I'd look at them, and I think to myself, I could finish the French fries on every one of these people's plates. And then I'd think to myself, that's probably not normal. Like, there's something about my relationship with food that's very, attached, very emotionally connected.
Mm.
And so I started waking up to that and realizing that I would eat, even though I wasn't hungry. I would overeat in spite of being full. So
Mhm.
I'd eat to the point of feeling stuffed and
Yeah.
gross and pissed at myself. Like, what did I just do? Like, that, I feel so bad. I wish I could undo it, and I would even sometimes, I was a binger. Okay. So I would say, I like to get, a good night for me was getting some brownies or cookies and ice cream, with some chips, because you have to have salty with the sweet. So, and
Yeah.
sitting in front of my favorite TV show, but I'd end up eating most all of it, not just a bowl of ice cream, but I'd keep going back. To me, I'd just take the lid off and really just stick a spoon in it. So the fact that I would eat, much, much more than I planned to eat, and then feel really bad, sometimes I would feel so sick that I would think to myself, I am never eating that again. Like, those kinds of chips, disgusting to me. Like, that ice cream, I never want to see ice cream again. So
Mm.
I'd throw it out, in disgust. But then later, when I had some more room in my tummy, or after I'd kind of had a nap, which is another word for passing out on the couch in a sugar coma, and I'd wake up, And if I had thrown out something that was edible, like some extra cookies, I would go back and retrieve them
From the
because
trash. Oh,
yes.
wow. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's how it manifested for me. And I'm telling you, there's nothing more shameful than literally digging some cookies out of the trash and eating them. And of course, I thought I was the only one who'd ever done that kind of thing. So I
Yeah.
was like the worst person in the world, according to me. Turns out later I did a YouTube video kind of reenacting garbage eating, and
Uh-huh.
I got like 60,000 views on it because I was not the only one who had done that. But anyway, point is, my eating got the best of me and I lost control. So to me, that's really where the emotional eating comes in, is where you just eat way beyond what you need.
Yeah.
You eat in excess, you eat foods that you don't, that aren't good for you, but
Right.
you eat them anyway.
So if somebody were to have, like a craving or think that they're hungry and they're like, man, I need to grab something at this point, is there anything they could do to discern, okay, my body needs some nutrition right now versus, okay, there's an uncomfortable emotion that I want to cover up? What do those things look like?
Yeah. So the top thing that I recommend to people is something I call 3 meal magic, which is eating 3 meals with nothing in between, because people would be amazed at how emotional their eating is. And if they stop snacking,
Mm-hmm.
and there's, snacky foods are rarely good for you foods, nuts and chips and chocolates and candies and that kind of
Yeah,
thing. So
right.
if you stop snacking and just limit your meal, like limit to 3 actual meals, food that you put on a plate, you sit down, you have a fork and a knife, you eat it, like if you just do that, oftentimes people will have a rude awakening to how emotional their choices are, because they'll be thinking about food in between meals and be like, I'm going to go I'm going to get up from my desk and go get something there. And then you think, oh, wait, it's not mealtime, and so it brings it into real clear focus that a lot of our eating is just boredom,
Yeah.
unconscious eating, so that's a great place to start, is just realizing, wow, and if you do that 3 meal magic plan, you cut out a lot of the unhealthy foods that you would normally snack on, and so all of a sudden you're eating healthier as it is, because food you put on a plate is not usually like a pile of chocolate or Hershey's Kisses, so
Right.
you end up just naturally eating healthier that way. So that's something I recommend to people,
Mhm.
but
Is there a quality to the type of hunger that you feel? You mentioned sort of like almost sort of like feeling like a huge craving. Is that something that is
yes.
more on the emotional side versus the physical side?
It really depends. Another thing I like about 3 meal magic and eating 3 meals is it's a really self-caring way to eat, and
Mhm.
you're making sure to feed yourself. So emotional eaters tend to want to hack the system.
Mhm.
Okay. And so they think, we have that little voice that says, oh, if I skip lunch, if I work straight through lunch, I'm going to lose weight. Like I'm going to skip a meal here or there and lose weight, but they make up for it later. They get extra hungry and they tend to overeat. That's why intermittent fasting can be troubling for an emotional eater. It's great in terms of, on paper, the science and the good things it can do for your longevity wise. But if somebody's an emotional eater and they go too long without eating, then they compensate and
Mhm.
overeat. And that can obviously kind of defeat the whole purpose. So, my experience with the 3 meals is that if you eat, and you can still intermittent fast, you put 12 hours between your dinner and your breakfast,
Right.
but if you have those 3 meals with, 4 hours or so in between your meals, then you will naturally, it helps you sort of gauge whether your hunger is physical or emotional. For instance, if I eat breakfast at 7, and around 9:30 or 10, I all of a sudden go, I'm so hungry. Like, oh my God, I have to eat. And I get this sort of panic that I've got to go get something to eat. I can kind of deconstruct it. I sort of unpack it by saying, okay, Tricia, are you really so hungry? Because I mean, I've been doing this work for 30 years. I still am amazed at how emotional hunger can mask itself as physical hunger. So
Mm.
the 3 meals helps me say to myself, let's look at this rationally. Are you really starving as you're telling yourself you are? And I'm like, well, I ate a really healthy breakfast, good proteins, good fats, good veggies, whatever you have in your, carbs, whatever in your breakfast. And then I'm like, no, I'm probably not, actually starving, because, it's only been 3 hours and I could probably make it to lunch, 12 o'clock lunch or whatever. And so then I jump to what's really going on. I kind of dig a little and think, what might be going on? And then I can see, I've got a pile of work to do that I don't want to do. I'd rather be outside, or it's tax time. And I sure as hell don't want to do my taxes. And I'll be able to see that it's probably not physical, but emotional. And so just having those markers of meals can help you sort of talk to your irrational, hungry self, your emotionally hungry self, and see that, you're probably not physically hungry, but you're going to be okay. You're going to get your next meal. And that's another thing too, is when we eat erratically, we're not on a schedule and there's no structure around our food. And then we just guess out of it. So, I mean, there's a common term, which is intuitive eating, which again is not a bad concept, but I would intuit that I should eat way more than I should, or maybe way more often than I should, because my head would play tricks on me. And when food is my main means of coping with stress, because I haven't developed new coping tools, I'm going to talk myself into eating. And that's just, the emotional eater is great at rationalizing their food choices.
This episode of the Thrive State podcast is brought to you by the Thrive State Accelerator. The Thrive State Accelerator is actually a home course that I developed using the exact same techniques I work with my celebrity clients, CEOs, and executives on how to get them to the Thrive State. The Thrive State Accelerator teaches you how to master your 7 bioenergetic elements. That's sleep, nutrition, movement, stress and emotional mastery, relationships, our thoughts and mindset, as well as purpose. In this Thrive State Accelerator, you're also going to get a bonus module on optimization. That's how I talk about supplementation, peptides, all the optimization techniques I use with my clients to get them to the Thrive State. Now, for some of you who are just joining us for the first time, you guys might be wondering, what is the Thrive State? Well, the Thrive State is actually the energy, the epigenetic environment we give to ourselves, telling our DNA how to act and how to respond. And if we want optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, if we can master these 7 bioenergetic elements, our ability to have those 3 things that we just said, optimal health, longevity, and peak performance, is at its greatest. And it also prevents you from getting chronic symptoms like brain fog, being overweight, feeling sluggish, acne, pain, all these chronic symptoms, as well as preventing you from getting chronic disease. So getting to that Thrive State is really getting to that state to master being that very best version of yourself, so you could show up for you, for your family, for your business, everything that's important to you. So go ahead, check it out right now at kienvu.com/accelerator and use coupon code podcast25 for 25% off. Now back to the podcast.
So it helps me to just know that the next meal is coming. And I also tell people, and not, my point there was, eat on a schedule, not strict. It doesn't have to be strict. If you're going out to dinner, you can eat an hour later than you normally would, perhaps, for dinner reservations or whatever, but don't go too long. Like I don't make dinner reservations at 9, because I'll get too hungry and I'll eat the bread on the table. So I want to sort of, it really is so much about self-care. And you mentioned that in your questions early on. And so much of this is learning to really take care of ourselves. And I tell my clients, treat yourself like you would, your sweet baby daughter or son, and you have a little one at home. And so, would you say to your little one, oh, you're going to skip lunch today because you might lose a few pounds, no, of course not. You'd make sure, that your kid is fed because you love him, you love her, you want to treat her with so much care and love. but we don't do that for ourselves. We're like, let's hack the system. Let's starve ourselves. Let's beat ourselves up with, really harsh exercise or exercise regime, just so we can fit into our skinny jeans. And we have to start changing that conversation and thinking, let's treat ourselves and our bodies with respect and love. What is compassionate? What's loving? And it's not eating, a bunch of chips and ice cream, So there's a difference between eating to feel good in the moment and eating to feel good about yourself long term. So
is there a difference between an emotional eater and a food addict?
Yes. So in my experience, I am an emotional eater and a food addict. So it's really, in my experience, a spectrum. Okay. And I've been researching this for 30 years. So it's really, I feel like as humans, we have some wiring towards emotional eating. I feel like we were made to have an emotional connection with food, just like an infant, breastfeeds, right? And has that connection with his mother. There is some emotional connection with food, which is not bad. Sure. It keeps us eating and subsisting as a species. So there's nothing wrong with feeling really good about a really yummy, warm, carrot ginger soup or something. And it just warms our bones and feels great. Or something carby, like, sweet potato or something like that. Baked potato, of course, was my big thing growing up. But so there's nothing wrong with having that connection. It's just a matter of how far you take it and how much food serves emotional needs instead of, or beyond physical needs. So to me, it's a spectrum. And on the low end is emotional eating. We can all go there, right? We can all go on a cruise, eat too much, gain 50 pounds, not 50, sorry, 5 pounds, like maybe eating too much bread and wine, drinking too much wine, and we can put on a little weight, feel a little bit, our pants feel a little snug. Okay. That's a normal thing that happens. If somebody can course correct and be like, oh, I don't like how tight my pants are, I'm going to run extra this week and cut out sweets. Okay. That's somebody with a good amount of control, so they can sort of get back to their normal. And so that's somebody with a good amount of control and very little consequences. So how we qualify where somebody is on the spectrum, the low end being emotional eating, on the high end is food addiction. Okay. So when somebody has a good amount of control and very few consequences, they're on the low end. If somebody has very little control, like once they start to eat, they open that door into sugar and then they can't close it, and they end up binging on sugar and feeling inflamed, bloated, gaining weight. And they sort of go down this dark hole of binging for 2 weeks, something that happened a lot with COVID. That's somebody with very little control. And then if somebody is an emotional eater and they do that a lot, and over many years, because people who are emotional eaters and they try to fix it with diet, they typically fail. 98% of all diets fail. So they're going to be on this roller coaster ride for years, if not decades. Okay. And if you do that long enough, that yo-yo thing, you're going to wreck your body and you're going to have issues, right? So you're going to have the sagging skin, obviously, sugar that affects the elasticity in our skin, creates inflammation, bloating, gut issues, autoimmune issues, not to mention heart disease, diabetes, the list goes on and on. So the older somebody gets, and they have only been trying to treat the symptom, but it keeps coming back, which it will if they don't go deeper, they're going to have a lot of consequences. So in my experience, I was a food addict because I ate a lot of food. I had very little control and I was starting to amass consequences. So that's really how somebody knows where they are on the spectrum. And to make it easy, I've created a quiz, a free quiz that somebody can take to find out where they are on that spectrum, and they get a personalized score. It's on my website. So I recommend that people take the quiz and find out if they're an emotional eater or a food addict, or where on the spectrum they are.
We'll put it on our show notes, but go ahead and say where they could find that quiz now.
Sure. It's at healyourhunger.com, HEAL, healyourhunger.com. And it's a free quiz. There's a pop-up and also a button you can press. And it's like a 3-minute quiz, but you'll get immediately a score and find out where you are and then what to do about it.
Oh, that's great. We talk about yo-yo dieting. Why do you think 98% of all diets fail?
I think it's exactly because people are focused too much on the symptom of food and weight. I mean, it's like we have some kind of dieting amnesia where we forget how many diets we've been on and how unsuccessful they were. And I have people say, oh, I've been on several diets that were successful. And you got to hear that. Like, what, really? Like, how successful was it if you kept going on another diet? And that's what we do. We kind of serial diet because sure, you might lose weight, but to me, keeping it off is the kicker. That's the thing we really want, is a plan that's sustainable. And if you go on a diet, you have to come off a diet, and that's where people get into trouble, is they go back to eating the way they were eating before they went on the diet, and boom, lo and behold, they're back where they started. So it really takes a more sustainable plan. And to me, that's really going deeper and dealing with stress, dealing with, having better self-care tools. Because for me, food was my go-to. We talked about that as a kid. You learn as a kid that food will keep you safe. If you had sexual abuse, you tend to put on weight, so you have some protection in your body, and you just basically comfort yourself with food, and that's your primary coping tool. And you bring that into your adulthood. Yeah. And the reason why diets fail is because we don't have any replacement tools. So you take food and yummy foods and ooey gooey chewy foods. My favorite 3 food groups were sugar, fat, and starch, and so you take that away. And what are you going to do to deal with stress? Like, what are you going to do when hard times happen? And I can't tell you. I mean, if I had $1 for every time I heard someone say, I was doing good until COVID. All the time, I was doing good until COVID. Well, guess what? Life will happen. We can't put ourselves in a bubble where, COVID was extreme, of course, but the bottom line is COVID, death, change of jobs, moving to a new country. You name it, there's lots of opportunities for stress and getting derailed. And so we need a better plan than just trying to quote, eat right. Like we need new tools for dealing with stress that aren't food, because if you take food off the table as a coping mechanism and you don't have other like really solid, good, dependable coping tools, you're going to go back to what you know. And
let's go directly to those tools then. So what are some things that people can do to end emotional eating right now?
Yeah. So I have something I refer to lovingly as the 6 self-care success secrets. And I mentioned one of them early on, which is meditation. And honestly, everybody knows they should meditate and nobody wants to. Okay. So, and especially emotional eaters, because overeaters tend to be overdoers. So we love to be busy. We love to keep our schedule packed, and we love to like not slow down, because if we slow down, we might be like with feelings we don't want to feel. Okay. And that's the whole reason we eat, is we want to stuff those uncomfortable feelings. So meditation is a bit of a pickle for people because, we know it's good for us. We are, in the 21st century. It's not a secret that meditation is good on so many levels. There's much science behind it, the health benefits of meditation, but it does require that we slow down.
Yeah. Slowing down and just being a little bit more mindful of your thoughts and emotions definitely helps. So that was number 1. What were the other 5?
So another one that I highly recommend is writing. Okay. So we have to get more acclimated to our emotions instead of just stuffing them. If we're not going to stuff them, what are we going to do with them? My experience is having a regular daily writing routine where you have a journal next to you in the morning after you meditate, before you meditate, and just sort of, stream of consciousness, getting stuff out, or before you go to bed, kind of unburdening your consciousness of, things that happened in the day. Yes. We can go through the day so easily with, things that happen that stress us out, but we're moving so fast, we don't have time to deal with it. So just taking time to kind of offload some of that stress, and sort of get more integrated with our emotions. So, so powerful. Another is prayer. I love prayer. I'm not religious, but I'm definitely spiritual. And I like to sort of have this ongoing, connection, spiritual connection, and meditation helps me with that. Just getting centered and still first thing in the morning with a meditation and prayer routine. Very successful people are doing this. They're starting their day, not answering texts, not, running from one, stressor to another, but first giving themselves time to get still and quiet and centered, and so these types of things, you could have a stretching routine, yoga routine, something that just is calming. I use this, or I refer to this as putting money in your spiritual bank account, because again, we have to have new tools if we're not going to be depending on food. And oftentimes late in the day is when emotional eaters start having their cravings, late afternoon, they're low energy. There's a lot of stress that's piled up. If you've put money in your spiritual bank account first thing in the morning with this quieting, centering routine, you can take withdrawals later in the afternoon when you are feeling stressed and tired. Typically we want a cup of coffee, we want chocolate, we want something that'll give us that quick energy boost. My experience is if you put money in your bank account first thing in the morning, and you can also go back to meditation, and like I meditate twice a day. So the afternoon is when I need it the most, in the late afternoon, instead of a quick snack or something like that. So, but the point is we have to use these tools. We have to have something we can turn to from within, that can really help us. And there's great things. There's great guided meditations as well. If somebody's like, hell no, I'm not going to sit down and be quiet with my thoughts, you can do a guided meditation. There's a Calm app, Insight Timer, and other apps that have guided meditations. It's so wonderful now. Another is walking. I find that walking, it just changes your state so quickly. I like to walk and pray, but walking, just pushing away from your desk and going out for a 10-minute walk around the block. Oh my God, it can change your state so quickly. And especially if you do pray or listen to a positive podcast, like this one. So, and you just kind of fill your mind with good, positive thoughts. That's what we need to do, is we need to get off of the negative rant in our minds and turn to something a lot more positive. So walking is great. Talking is important. Picking up the phone and talking to a friend and just kind of offloading some of your stress by, talking it out. So important. And reading spiritual literature as well. Like I always have a little stack of like spiritual readers, like one a day, positive messages, or magazines that are super positive, magazine or something else that just has uplifting stories in it, something spiritual, religious, if you tend that way. So these are all things. So just to recap: meditation, prayer, reading spiritual literature, walking, talking, and journaling. These are the 6 self-care success secrets, and they work wonders. And honestly, I can't live without them. Like if I expect to not be turning to food, I've got to turn to something else, and food's everywhere, I want people listening who do struggle with food and weight to kind of get off their case, because you have to understand this is the hardest of all addictive habits.
Yeah.
Like, and we blame ourselves. We're like, oh, we should on ourselves, right? Like I should be able to do this. Like I should be able to get a hold of myself or get a hold of the sugar or whatever. But you have to understand it's everywhere. Everybody's pushing it. It's legal. It's socially acceptable. And everybody's rationalizing it and trying to get you involved so they can feel better about their own habits, and it's different from like alcohol, where you can put the plug in the jug or never walk at a bar. It's everywhere. And so this is even more reason why we need support, and it's not easy to do on our own. So community is a big part of, the way that I serve people is I have community of emotional eaters that can support each other, because it feels a little weird to be powerless over a cookie. You sort of judge yourself about it, but there's a whole lot of us out there. And when you're in community with other people on a healing journey, it makes it so much easier. Like when you're around other people who are meditating, for their health, they are doing these self-care tools. it doesn't seem so strange or different, and there's power in numbers, and you feel a lot more supported.
I've heard you talk about the anatomy of an emotional eater before. Can you break down what that is?
Absolutely. So, so much of the time we think of emotional eating just about eating over emotions, but there's more to it than that. In my experience, emotional eaters tend to have a way of responding to stress that's different, or reacting to stress really, that's different than your average person. And part of this is because we started at such a young age turning to food, and usually because of trauma, like you brought up earlier. We typically have trauma from our past of some kind, and that's where we sort of got hooked on using food to placate our emotions. But my experience is also during childhood and during times of trauma, we developed other coping tools that worked at the time. Okay. But when we keep using them in adulthood, they become very dysfunctional. And what they do is they actually create the very stress that we stress eat over. And so I often tell people, and I say this on my podcast, that it's really not so much an eating problem as it is a living problem. And so hence, again, why we don't want to just treat the symptom. We want to deal with what we're doing in our lives. And the good news is I tell people, you don't need 20 years of therapy to turn this ship around. You need to start looking at what your living habits are that are driving your eating. And going back to our childhood, I'll give you the top trait of an emotional eater. And these are the anatomy of emotional eater it's basically a composite of 24 personality traits that make up the emotional eater's personality. And the nice thing is, like, I take all the guesswork. Well, somebody doesn't have to figure out what their stuff is. If you've known one of us, you've known us all, and you could create a mold for emotional eaters and put us all in the mold, and not a single hair would hang out. So I take the guesswork out of it by naming what these 24 traits are. And it helps people realize, wow, like, this is me, and this has nothing to do with food, and yet it drives my eating. So to give you an example, the top trait of an emotional eater is people pleasing. So, and again, this goes way back. If you have an alcoholic parent who's a rager, or super manipulative, you're going to get really good at people pleasing. So you don't get your ass kicked, or so you don't get in trouble, or you're out of the line of fire. And other ways, if there was a lot of lack in your family, you get really good at modifying your behavior, being a good girl or whatever, so that you get what you need, and so what worked as a kid to just kind of survive ends up as adults to backfire on us. It no longer serves us. And the reason why people pleasing is so linked to overeating is that emotional eaters typically are people pleasers. And part of this is because we didn't get a strong sense of ourselves growing up. I know I didn't. I mean, my parents loved me, but there was a lot of dysfunction in my home. And so I did not get a strong sense of myself. And so I was looking outside of myself for the added girls, and so this translated into me always taking on the extra project at work, always raising my hand to, be the head of the committee. We're always doing the extra stuff in hopes of being recognized and being validated, because we don't have it for ourselves. It's a natural thing to do. It's a human quality to want to be recognized, of course, but we tend to take it to the extreme, and we are like totally like maxed out, stressed out, doing too much, doing somebody else's job or more than we really should be doing, because we are subconsciously looking for the validation. And the reason why this leads to eating is because when we are stressed out, when our adrenals are tapped out, and we're exhausted and burned out, and on top of it, we're also pissed off and we're resentful because nobody's ever as pleased as we plan on them being, right? Like we get a little offhanded thank you, or like, thank you. Like I pulled an all-nighter for this deal, and that resentment, along with feeling burned out, leads to what I call the I deserve it binge. We're like, screw them. Like, they're not going to recognize us. I'm going to have my own little party, and we go home with our binge foods. So it's just an example of how we're causing the stress. We didn't have to volunteer for all of those things, right? But because of needing that validation, we do. And so I'm, all the time really coaching my clients, like, pull back, like, stop doing everything. You're not Superwoman. You don't have to do everything, and it's not going to pay off for you anyway. You'd better be better off taking care of yourself. And not that we turn into, selfish, self-centered people, but it's just really important to have more balance around what's ours and what somebody else's, and having more boundaries around that, and learning how to say no. Like, I'm sorry, my plate's full, which is not so far off, so, but it's just, this is an example of one of the traits of the anatomy of an emotional eater, and how it ostensibly has nothing to do with food, but it does drive our eating.
Oh, all this is such great information. I mean, today, I think people really learn that what drives a lot of behavior, or maybe some unwanted behavior, whether it be eating, whether it be smoking, whether it be, going from the alcohol, stems a lot from our emotions. And that's really the key there. And it's really not focusing on the amount of food necessarily, or the food itself, or a diet, but going to the root cause, which is the emotions. And I love the fact that you gave us those 6 tips to deal with emotional eating. Before we send people to my last question, where do people find you?
My website, healyourhunger.com, for sure. My podcast is called The Heal Your Hunger Show. I have a Facebook group that people can join for support, and I record my show in that group as well. It's called The Secret Sauce to End Emotional Eating. And then Instagram, I'm at Tricia Nelson _ at the end of the N and Nelson. So Tricia Nelson _ I do a lot of posts around emotional eating and fun memes and that kind of thing.
That's beautiful. Now, for the very last question, you certainly, have overcome so much in life, probably lots of different tools you picked up along the way, but what has been your best medicine?
I'd say my best medicine is love. So much, the food kept me from loving myself. When I was in the food, it really caused a lot of, obviously it was a result of not loving myself, but then it exacerbated, my sense of self-disappointment. So clearing that was so vital for helping me love myself and having love flow through me, but also just connection and community. Letting the love flow by not isolating, by getting the support I needed. And then that's so much of what I do for my clients, is help them feel supported. And, to me, it is all about love.
Oh, beautiful. Well, Tricia Nelson, such great information today. Thank you for being on the Thrive State podcast.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Thrive State podcast. And if this podcast is bringing a lot of value to you, if you find that your life is just improving with this podcast, that your life is getting to the next level, please consider supporting it. And here's a few ways you can do so. You can do so by liking this video and commenting on this video, and also sharing this video with your friends and family. Another thing you can do is go to ratethis.com/ThriveState. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review there. It will really, really help this show grow. And this will give me more time so that I could actually give more content to you, just like you got in this episode. And if you haven't already picked up a copy of my book, Thrive State, Your Blueprint for Optimal Health, Longevity, and Peak Performance, you can pick it up now. It became a #1 new release in longevity. Go to thrivestatebook.com. And if you enjoy the book, please consider leaving us a review as well. And the last thing you can do, if you're liking everything here and you want to work more closely with me as well as my team to get you into the Thrive State, go to kienvu.com/accelerator and consider joining the home course, the Thrive State Accelerator. It's really the course that I use. It's the concepts that I use personally when I work with CEOs, celebrities, and my high-profile clients to get them to the Thrive State. Again, the Thrive State Accelerator at kienvu.com/accelerator. And because you're a listener of this podcast, I want you to save 25% by using the coupon code podcast25. I hope we continue to give value to you. And remember always, you are your best medicine.